So Cynthia, thanks so much for this opportunity to have a conversation with you. So what's been on my mind is that we're in rapid change because of COVID-19 and how it's impacting the world. And because of how it's impacting the world, it's changing the way we are thinking and doing business and life. And I have a growing desire for myself and for others to connect around what the new normal is going to look like when we come out of this. What is changing and what will have transformed, meaning it won't go back as a result of this. So yeah, that's why I wanted to talk to you, because I want to get to know you more and I want to have this conversation with you.
Absolutely. So let's calibrate on what we think the new normal is. How would you describe it?
First thing that comes to mind is questions. So in the new normal, we are connecting more virtually, and it's commonplace than we are physically. One of the questions that may become a guide in decision making is this essential in person? And if it's not essential in person, how else might we deliver the message, make the decision, execute the plan?
Interesting. And I'm glad I started there, because prior to me branching out to do my own work, I worked for a national consulting firm, actually two in my span of experience. And because the goal was always to keep costs down and to be as effective as possible, that was always our normal. That was always the question we used as a lens to determine whether or not we needed to be sitting face to face with somebody or whether it could be virtual, because 9 times out of 10, it required us to get on a plane and go across the country. So I consistently have these questions with these conversations with my friends who've always worked in a traditional setting. And beyond being forced to stay home and not be able to leave socially, this has always been my new normal as it relates to professionally, or it has been my normal. So
yeah, it's your normal.
It's always been my normal. So yeah, just that guiding question. Yeah.
Yeah. So thanks for sharing that, your experience. And what comes to mind for people that feel uncomfortable, or leaders that feel uncomfortable or awkward about the reality that this is something that not only might they be mandated to do through policy, but also through employees or through vendors or through customers saying, can we just do this virtually?
Right.
And they feel awkward. They feel like a sense of, I'm losing control. The way I do business is this way. This is how I've always done business. I want to do business as usual. Does anything come up for you around that?
It does. First, I should give a disclaimer, though, that my last answer wasn't in any way to position myself as an expert in any of this. I just was saying that that I do feel like that's the lens that we've always looked through. What comes up for me to your last question, though, is I think leaders that struggle the most with this will be the leaders who struggle with reading people even in person. And so leaders who put programs over people and who have a really hard time zeroing in on how people are feeling, responding, reacting, even when they're in person, that just gets harder virtually. When you've made an intentional practice around getting good at that in person, it becomes easier virtually. You still are intently listening to what people are saying and what they're not saying, when they're with you and when they're not with you, when they're distracted and when they're not distracted. And so that skill set is very transferable, but it's super hard to learn for the first time virtually. You kind of have to learn it when you're with the people and then transfer it in other circumstances. The other thing it made me think of is when we started to work with ARC, one of the very first things I spent a big chunk of time doing in that very first session is doing some intentional instruction around what it looks like to be an active listener. And there's a whole body of research that talks about how listening is one of the core components to any great person developed in a professional setting or otherwise. But I asked them, how many of you have actually ever had any intentional instruction around how to be a good listener? And of the 3 cohorts of people, 1 person raised their hand. And so we assume when we say to people that we need you to listen carefully, they even know what that means. And we haven't done nearly enough around what does it mean to be an active listener. And it is a skill set. And it is a set that needs to be practiced and honed. And it's hard. It's hard because our brain can process so much faster than people can talk. So we have all this extra room for mayhem and foolishness while somebody else is talking that our brains can be doing. And so it's a discipline. And that also comes up.
Mayhem and foolishness, that is quotable. Cynthia.
Mayhem and foolishness is what I call it.
So what I hear you saying is leaders that are going to transition into this new normal or succeed in this new normal are going to be instructed and develop active listening, will become a priority.
Absolutely. I think it's long overdue, even before this new normal. But I think it's going to be even more crucial now that I think gone are the days where you as a leader can just stand and disseminate information. I mean, there is an exchange that goes with this, but I think it's going to be even more important now.
So I can sense your passion through the screen around listening. Why is listening so important to you?
It is so important to me because it is foundational to really understanding people. I think when we listen with intent to respond, then we don't give ourselves the processing time it takes to really understand what a person is saying. And therefore, lots of miscommunication happens because we never heard what the person said in the first place. The other thing I think, particularly as it relates to a leader, when a person comes to you to be heard, most adults just want to be heard. They want to have a reflective conversation rather than a problem-solving conversation. And so and I think as a leader, you have to be able to discriminate which one of those is most appropriate, if not just blatantly ask. Are you wanting and I usually think of it as 3 buckets. Is this a planning conversation? Is this a problem-solving conversation? Or if this is a reflective conversation? If the person says reflective, I know that I have to hyperly listen and ask good questions. And that's it. I'm not offering advice. I'm not trying to lead them to any particular outcome. They just really need a sounding board. And it's interesting to me how often, even when people don't name it, that really is what they want. And if you just listen intently and ask good questions, at the end of it, they will assess that you've helped them so much. And I will think to myself, I literally didn't do anything except really listen to you and paraphrase back to you what you said with the level of clarity. That's it.
So you're saying something that I hear as vital, though. So if we are going to succeed now more than ever in our leadership and in our organization, in our lives, when things are so disrupted, we are going to listen reflectively. That's what I heard you say. And so listening reflectively, what are some of the techniques? Like, how do you manage your own noise when you're listening reflectively?
Oh, that is, Scott, I teach whole courses on that.
Well, we need to have a Zoom on that course. Post it for people.
I would love to. I think I try to practice a cadence of pausing, listening very intently to the person's actual words and their body language, and maintaining eye contact when they are talking. pausing after they pause to give them the space and opportunity to elaborate without me breaking their train of thought with my own curiosity, and then asking a question. And I should back up and say, I try to enter every conversation with a question instead of a statement. So I enter as a coach and I exit as a coach. Now, sometimes in between there, we might go into problem solving or more of a consulting role, depending on what the person is asking of me. But I always want to enter and exit with the person feeling like it was their thinking that was centered and not mine. Because I think this is important for leaders, but it's especially important for coaches. I want people to leave sessions with me thinking, geez, I knew more than I thought I did. I had more clarity than I thought I did, rather than leaving thinking, oh, my coach is so wonderful. Like, if that's what they're leaving thinking, that I've overtalked and I've done too much thinking and sharing. So that's kind of how I gauge my own.
So it sounds like in the new normal, we're going to need coaching conversations. Reflective conversation. So a coaching conversation, in my mind, sounds like what? Asking what? Asking how? Sometimes asking why. This, and this comes from my background and some of the information that I've been getting in training as well. So I'm wondering, like, what could we do right now to kind of model what we mean by a coaching conversation?
That's a very good question.
And I need a name that during my listening to you, my phone kept buzzing. So now I'm going to put my phone on because I couldn't active listen. Plus, I'm working from home. I should say I was distracted. I could active listen, but I was distracted. Plus, I'm working from home, and I'm hearing my children in the background. And so there's this real present challenge for us in this age. And so not only is the minimize the noise externally, but to minimize the noise internally so that we can actually listen.
Exactly. I cut my chops on this training when I was in high school and as a high school leader. And there
Tell us about it. Tell us about an example. Do you have an example?
Like, there are like a zillion things going on, especially at the start of the day. But typically when teachers come in, their concerns, they've thought about them overnight. So they come in the door with them and then they hit you with, can I get a second? Can I talk to you for a minute? And I used to say to people, which I'm so ashamed of now because it's the most rude thing in the world, I would say to them, I got a minute. So if you can tell me in a minute, you got me, and we can go from there. And the whole time they're talking, I have this like hurry up like stance, which is one of the most disrespectful things I feel like you can do. And I learned to shift to what you have to say to me is super important, whatever it is. I can't fully attend right now because I'm distracted. Sometimes I would name what that distraction is. I'm distracted by X, Y, Z, the start of school. I need to get to the restroom. I haven't had coffee, whatever that thing is. I'm distracted. Can we schedule a time so that I can fully attend? So what I'm suggesting is, if you can't give the person the gift of a fully plugged in conversation, delay it rather than rush it. And I think people learned to appreciate that. And I know that because now when people enter conversations with me, and I model this all the time, is this a good time? Like, that's almost always, did I catch you at a good time? Is this a bad time or whatever? And just by that, I mean, can you pay attention to me right now? Because if you can't, I'd rather you just say, I'd absolutely rather you say, actually, yeah, you did catch me at a bad time. I'm distracted by my kids. I got a lot of phone calls to make. Can we talk in 15 minutes?
Yeah.
Can we?
And that reminds me of what so many managers deal with is workers go home, employees go home, they come back, they had this on their mind. Can I talk to you? Can I talk to you? Can I talk to you? And this open door policy becomes a burden to be able to be present. And so the technique I'm hearing is this direct reflection of, I hear you, it's important, here's what's going on, here's when it can happen. So what are other things though that could get in the way? So what's coming up for me is like, what are the judgments? So when I'm listening, I'm analyzing, I'm critiquing, I'm having feelings, I have a history, I have a background that's all informing my ladder of inference and decision making in my mind, and I'm limited. I'm limited by my own experience, my own privilege, my own background to sometimes be the presence I want to be, because I may come across something that triggers a bias or an irritant or a thing that I haven't built up the muscle or the skill set yet to acknowledge and at least know for myself so that I can adjust my own approach. Was there anything in my rambling that connected with you that?
Absolutely. I think that's a super real dilemma. And I often use a piece by Margaret Wheatley with folks called Willing to be Disturbed. It's old, but it is timeless.
I love Margaret Wheatley.
Yes, me too. You got to read. I'll send it to you as soon as we get off this. You have to, and not just read Willing to be Disturbed. You have to just like dissect it sentence by sentence because it is so rich.
Sit in it. I have to sit in it.
You have to sit in it.
I'll take a bath in it.
Absolutely. It's one of those pieces. But in it, she talks about listening for what disturbs you. And instead of, at least this is my loose interpretation. She might not say this directly. This is how I have made meaning over it over the years. Instead of being triggered by, maybe triggered is not the right word. You're listening for where the differences are. And you're listening intently for what disturbs you. And instead of making a judgment about the other person, you use that as a self-evaluative tool to determine, why am I holding so tight to this particular belief? Because if you hear something that somebody says that triggers you, that's insight into a strongly held belief that somebody else may have a different perspective for you than you. And it is an awesome opportunity to examine that deeply held belief. And sometimes I've learned, I don't even know where that belief came from or why I'm holding on to it so tightly. And I've changed my mind in some conversations. But there have also been times when I've held even more tightly. But it's a great opportunity to really self-reflect and examine which of our beliefs are still forming and can be changed, and which ones are we gonna double down on and just really hold as core values. And so you can enter each conversation knowing every single person I have a conversation with, there's something for me to learn, even if it's just about myself. So yeah, I love that piece, and it's centers me.
And please send that to me. I'm inspired right now or what's coming up for me right now listening to you is what I hear you saying is listen to what's different, listen to what disturbs, allow that to be informative, to inform you on what might no longer serve your goal.
Absolutely.
The belief might be getting in the way of the goal. Things have changed. Things have changed. It is very different.
Yeah, that's very well said, Scott.
I live in a small town that was a farmland outside of 30 miles outside of Philadelphia. And even things have changed here, although we may not want to see that as things have changed.
Absolutely.
This new normal is the leveling of healthcare, economies, societies. It's a leveling.
Yes.
In a way, I feel this is going to take us maybe somewhere different, but I feel overwhelmed, exhaustion, and more privilege than ever before.
Yes.
It's like ridiculous amounts of privilege.
Absolutely.
Like I'm having this conversation with you right now. People are dying in hospital beds because there are not enough ventilators. There are not enough doctors to actually serve. They're making decisions on who dies.
Wow.
In a time where we have more than enough resources with just a little planning, a little alignment. And that's over tangential. Let's stay with the topic. Yeah. Potentially active listening. Potentially.
Yeah. And I think about you saying things have changed, but I would even push that further and say we have changed, but we have not even slowed down with enough intentionality to articulate that change. And that's what active listening and being reflective gets you. I love that you said some of our beliefs are getting in the way of our goals professionally and personally. But again, we haven't spent enough time learning and reflecting and changing ourselves in this ever-changing time, that things like where we've landed now with all of the inequities that are surfacing. Imagine had we really listened to people before this crisis. If we had really listened to folks who were not in need, who were in need, and instead of determining that they were lazy or that they should pull themselves up by their bootstraps or any number of evaluative statements we've gotten so comfortable with, this may have played out completely differently, but we haven't. So, yeah.
If we could learn anything and apply it right now, related to that statement of listening to the inequities, is there something that comes up for you?
Oh, wow.
I heard listening to the inequities beforehand, applying change and a plan to address those so that we were prepared for a catastrophe this is a catastrophe.
This is a catastrophe.
And there's still a debate whether it's a health catastrophe or an economic catastrophe. It's both. and what comes up for me is I am privileged. And so I need to take strong stances in the health category. And I want to influence all the people in my area and my sphere of influence to do the same, recognizing that there is currently economic impact to me professionally, but I have a runway at least 95% of the American people don't have. Potentially, I don't even know, 98, maybe 99, not sure. So with that level of insight and responsibility, it does have me wondering, like, what wasn't I listening to? I don't know if that's the right question. What can I do different today and then going forward? Professionally, one of the things I want to do is have more of these conversations. And maybe it's not even professionally, I want to be an evangelist for this good news, that we can apply these models of thinking that you're representing in active listening from people who have lived it. There's the theory, there's the research, there's the basis. It's everywhere. It is everywhere. There's so much. It's so good. And yet we don't accept it. And my thesis is it's because we're not hearing it enough in normal everyday language from people who have embodied it. There's an embodiment. And when I have encountered you the limited times I have, that's what I sense. So I deeply appreciate you've taken us to this active listening and this, because you're expressing, I hear values in it. And I'm asking this question right now. What's the belief that's no longer served me that I can let go of to move into this value of deep listening to the inequities that were not heard and maybe not heard in my own life, and then apply that to actions I take in my personal life and in my business? And how do I do that? And I don't have an answer yet.
I was going to say, if you had to name that right now, Scott, what would you name? And I know I'm putting you on the spot and you haven't really had a chance to think about it, but
I think one would be using any privilege I have to platform other diverse voices of leaders. So that's the first thing that comes to mind. Second, from a financial model, ask who else needs these services that we provide and how do we deploy it in a more economically available model. Like my services go to business owners and leaders, and they're expensive. And so how does that work? To teach and instruct and inform and develop. So coaching is for development. Develop the skills that allow people to lead and live differently that would never have the access to these models. So for me, it's when I feel fear and scarce, it's easier for me to go into a feelings space, if that's okay, than it is. But then I like to try to move into a practical, like tactical space, but I usually need help. But a feeling space would be notice overwhelm, notice fear. Notice overwhelm show up in my shoulders, tense. Notice fear show up in my gut, like anxiety. And then in my thinking, it's all the reasons why not. All the reasons why businesses are putting their pins in their contracts for me. All the reasons why they won't come back online. All the reasons why my revenues will be cut in half this year and I won't hit personal goals for me and my family. So that could drive the bus. Or all the reasons why we're still able to work, we're still able to live. More than ever now, I'm thinking about how do we have more of these conversations and distribute these conversations effectively into the, online communities of business, of organization, of life, so that people are learning and continuing the conversations in their spheres of influence. So that's one actionable item. When I turn my mind on what's possible and what informs what's possible is based on the pain and suffering I see as a result of the inequity, and realize the pain and suffering I feel is a result of entitlements being taken away. Like expectation, entitlement, I don't know, one and the same for me, but that's what's being taken away.
Right.
And that's a gift. That can be a gift or that can be not a gift. And so it's learning that there's a choice in what perspective I take, but I'll need a community. I won't be able to do this alone. It's impossible. I will just fall back into what's safe and secure and comfortable for me. That will be very easy for me. I can hide out, no doubt. So,
yeah.
What did you, I don't know.
So many nuggets in that. Like, that was a very insightful, thoughtful response for having to just like really think about it in the moment. And I think what sticks in my brain about you wanting to use your privilege as a platform to like evangelize for people is admirable and is I don't know what the other side of admirable, I don't know what adjective to correctly put there, so I'll just skip right past that. But here's one of my favorite quotes is, "It's hard to hate someone whose story you know. The more you know somebody, it's really hard to their story is really hard to dislike them." But I've added on to that quote over the years because of my experiences. It's also super easy to pathologize a people you don't know. And so I think certain parts of our population have been telling us for centuries, this does not work for me. this is not working for me. My life is not fulfilled. I don't have all that I need. White dominant culture as it exists now is it's not what makes me comfortable. It's not how I choose to operate. It's not how I choose to show up in life. And they're saying that to us in productive and in not so productive ways. I think where the mismatch is that people, well-intended people, have determined that they should swoop in and provide the solutions to rescue people from that, as opposed to get knee and really hear what's not working and positioning people to be the heroes of their own story. So I'm not swooping in with an answer. I'm not swooping in with a check. I'm not swooping in with all these resources to not only dump on you and probably put all these parameters on how you should use it. What I'm doing is empower. I hate the word empower sometimes because it sort of suggests there was no power until you showed up. But maybe like galvanizing people's power that they already have, positioning them to use what they already know to change their own circumstance and get out of the way so that they can. And that requires such an ego checking that even people that intend to do good sometimes end up doing the exact opposite. And then they say, well, I tried to help those people and they wouldn't even do it the way I said they should do it. And it's just like this cycle of, and no places that play out more clearly than in schools. And I see now, kids have been saying forever, not just urban kids all over the country, in suburban, rural, wherever, school, the way school is being done now does not work for me. We have evolved. What grabs our attention and engages us has evolved. This does not work for us anymore. And we still just we'll throw a Chromebook or an iPad in the room and say, okay, here's your technology, and pull them right back to traditional pedagogy and say, well, you said you needed technology. And this is such an opportunity to do school differently, not just do school virtually, but do school differently. I think that also can be lifted up to society. Like, this is a chance to do things differently, not just virtually. What are those differences?
Cynthia, please give us something. The pedagogy of, we have to. So far, what I want to come back to is coaching conversations at some point, different call.
I'll make sure.
For sure, anything in there you want to bring. The other one is, what beliefs that no longer serve us related to our own narratives and our stories, and how to let go.
Willing to be disturbed.
Yeah, willing to be disturbed. Thank you. That's beautiful. And now this one, the new pedagogy.
So I have to admit that. That's another thing I need to say. I have to admit that I've been reading Chris Edmond. I don't know if that's a name that'll ring a bell to you, and I need to put a pin there too and come back to that. But he has created this theory that he calls pedagogy of reality pedagogy. And so it really is like taking the person's reality and using what you find there to teach them in a way that really resonates with them. And he's a hip hop, real cool, super intelligent person who has made this his life's work. But there are also other people who have done the same. And this leads me to my point. Of course, by now, because I feel like every time we talk, I'm throwing some book at you that I've read or that you should read. So I'm obsessed with reading books, because I feel like if I can learn it through what you've already learned and made sense of, then that's an advantage for me. And so I just love to learn that way. But I'm very, very diverse in who it is I study and I learn from and I fall in love with, and I sort of build my own personal philosophy around. I believe that it is irresponsible for leaders to only learn from people who look like them. And so when, I want to know, even especially as a teacher, but also as a leader, who can you cite when you are saying, when you are teaching best practices, when you are expounding theory? Who is it that you are citing? And is there a level of diversity in who you're learning from? Because if not, you're still giving me a super singular perspective around whatever the issue is. And so cite somebody Black, cite somebody brown, cite women, learn from a variety of people, even in the realm of coaching. There are a diverse group of people who have made being an effective coach their life's work. And I learn from all of them equally. And I take, because again, they represent different life experiences and different perspectives. So I don't just read about Black coaches. I read about people that have been successful coaches, and I've intentionally diversified who I learn from. And I just think that's important for.
So based on what you're learning, and what grabs your attention and what you're learning, and as you think about the new pedagogy that would serve us in living and leading differently.
Yeah.
Across all, this is a leveling. Like our hypothesis is this event in our history, COVID-19, is a leveling of all systems.
Yeah.
So leaders that will emerge out of this will merge because of a pedagogy.
Right.
A reality-based pedagogy, as I heard you say. So what are some of the principles that you're thinking about?
So Chris Edmond would call it a reality pedagogy, but I would center it around some work that I've learned originally from Gary Howard, who wrote the book "We Can't Teach What We Don't Know," and that I've since expanded on in my experience. And he has a definition for what he calls culturally responsive pedagogy, which is a term that he didn't coin, but he really did a lot of great groundbreaking work around it. And he describes it and displays it as a triangle. And each leg of that triangle, it is know yourself, which is vitally important, and to me comes first. Know your content or your craft very well, and know your people or the client or people that you serve. And there are some intentional skill sets that go with all three of those things. And I think leaders that have been successful to date and that will continue to be more successful are going to be keenly aware of how they are keeping those three things in balance. Wow. What am I learning about myself, and how am I continuing to be self-reflective and learn about myself? How am I honing my craft? When I get people to trust in me and listen to me, do I know what I am talking about? And then finally, am I listening to people? Can I detect angst? And do I know what motivates them and interests them? And so it is those three legs always sort of working in concert with each other. That's
awesome. Is there any, I would like to bring our time to a close. I'm wondering if there anything you have a question for me or anything left unsaid you want to say when we close out.
I don't know. The only thing, like these conversations, I shouldn't be surprised at this point, but I'm still surprised at how much these conversations energize me. And they particularly energize me when I get to have them with somebody different than I am. They're energizing, period, but especially that. And so I wonder if that says something about Cynthia, or I wonder if it would be equally as energizing for other people who took the time to do it. I don't, but I could partly answer that. And some people find these conversations very triggering, but I also think it's because they haven't taken the time to understand what this really means. I don't know.
Well, I'll say for myself, I learn in conversation. I learn from reading. I love reading. I learn from applying what I've read as soon as humanly possible.
Yeah.
And testing it. And I unlearn and from reflection, but the conversation with difference, really any difference. And because I've spent so much time unlearning and I live in the community in which I was raised, I feel a lot of difference now.
Yeah.
So I don't live in an environment. I live in an environment that I feel very different from, foreign from, and I look like I shouldn't feel that way. So if I let my feelings guide me, then I'm not living a very peaceful life, a life at ease. But through my family and through my nuclear family and through these types of conversations, like I need these. That's what I need them. And my hope is we can figure out a way that these conversations get publicized, messaged, if at all, any of them, and invite more people into. So that would be the intent. Right now it's practice, like see what we can learn from it. And from my takeaway is those 3 items that came out from our conversation, which is listening. So learning to listen, the 3 legs of the triangle for the new pedagogy. And can you say it again, Wheatley's phrase?
I'm willing to be disturbed.
Willing to be disturbed.
Yeah.
I'm wondering if what we might do next, I'll stop the recording now.
Okay.
Hold on. Stop.